Hi, how are ya? Tesla is feeling very needy today, so he's going to join us maybe for just a little while. Our genes produce proteins that tell our body how to function. The tiny differences in our genes are called single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNPs. These genes are responsible for our psychological response and for our health. DNA methylation is an epigenetics mechanism that occurs. These effects make up who we are and why we're all so different, but more importantly, they might affect our health. And that's what I'd like to talk about today. A genotype is our genetic makeup. It's all the genes passed on by both sets of parents. Phenotype is what can be observed as characteristics of a human. Well, and animals too. Genes make up a portion of DNA that determines a certain trait. Genes come in multiple forms or versions, and each version is called an allele. A gene doesn't come in pairs, but alleles are found in pairs. So a gene is responsible for the expression of traits like eye color, hair color, and hairline shape. So you could have one gene for blue eyes and one for brown eyes. But it's the alleles that are responsible for the variation that a trait can express, like having blue eyes, blonde hair, and a low hairline. A gene will govern the traits of an organism by acting as instructions to make proteins. These proteins are important for our bodies because they produce hormones and create antibodies. The two copies of alleles of each gene are inherited, one from each parent. Alleles are versions of the same gene with slight variations in their sequence of DNA bases. I have two brothers. We have the same mom and dad. We look similar, but different because our personal alleles chose the features that you can see. I also have two half-sisters. We have different mothers, but we still look alike. I think my dad's genes are pretty strong. But a single trait is usually determined by a number of genes. For example, height is determined by over 400 genes. Chromosomes are very long strands of DNA wrapped around special proteins called histones. All humans have 46 chromosomes. Each parent passes on 23. The pair of alleles that determine the variations of the same gene are found at the same site on a chromosome. Not all genes end up being translated into visible traits, whereas the phenotype is made up of the expressed genes, the visible characteristics, blonde hair, blue eyes. Our genotype, the genes passed on by our parents, can be either homozygous for a trait or heterozygous for a trait. But no person is totally homozygous. Genes are too complex. So it's the traits that could be homozygous, like inheriting all blue-eye genes. And when two inherited alleles for a given gene is different, it's heterozygous, like blue eyes and brown eyes. So the trait that is visibly seen is the dominant trait. It's the one that's expressed. The trait that is present at the gene level but is not expressed is a recessive trait. You all probably heard this in biology class. I have blood type O, but my parents didn't. It's the only blood type that can be passed down from your parents, even if they don't have that particular blood type. So they passed their recessive O type onto me, and that's what was expressed as the dominant gene in my genotype. Crazy, huh? So somewhere in my family history, O blood type was passed on to each of them, and they were a carrier. Usually when a person receives two different alleles for a given trait, one is expressed and one isn't. For example, I have alleles that could have given me straight hair, but instead, the ones for curly hair was expressed and became dominant. So that's why family can look different but similar, or really different. I have a blonde, blue-eyed boy. He's got really blonde hair and very blue eyes. And I have a brown-eyed, very dark-haired daughter. She did a video with me. And a son with hair color like mine and hazel eyes like mine. Not exactly like mine, though. My boys might have the gene for dark hair, but in the matching of alleles, lighter hair color became dominant. But in the case of my daughter, she picked up the dark hair gene. A mutation is defined as any change in a DNA sequence away from normal. It's considered rare and abnormal. A mutation is a permanent alteration of an SNP, which I'll talk about, and can result in diseases like cystic fibrosis or hemophilia. To be considered a mutation, the frequency of it occurring in the population must be less than 1%. Polymorphism is a DNA sequence variation that's commonly found in the population. So when more than 1% of the population have the variation, it's called polymorphism. For example, one polymorphic sequence in some parts of Africa is resistant to malaria, but that same allele is a rare sequence in Caucasian populations in the US. Polymorphic sequences usually don't cause overt debilitating disease, but polymorphic sequences can be susceptible to disease. This is called single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNP. SNPs occur about once in every 100 base parts in our genome, which makes up about 3 million variations found in the genome. The SNP subtle changes can influence diseases like heart disease or Alzheimer's. We all have these SNPs in our DNA. They can act as biological markers for disease. They locate themselves mostly within a gene or in a regulatory region near a gene called non-coding, and can affect the gene's function to play a more direct role in disease. But it becomes even more complex than that. SNPs generate long non-coding RNAs, which have been implicated in several inflammatory diseases. So, a dysfunction of the immune system can cause an imbalance in the interaction between genetic and environmental factors. Just think celiac disease, inflammatory bowel disease, RA, type 1 diabetes, or MS. The problem for researchers is that 90% of the SNPs associated with these diseases are located in non-coding regions. This is an area of interest and major research is in effect. The research evidenced a linkage at markers and the genes that map on that region are, when I put these two genes in my Prometheus report, I got nothing. But there are others related to fibromyalgia that did show up in my search results. And I'll share those in a moment. In fibromyalgia, hypomethylated DNA pattern in genes is implicated for our stress response, DNA repair, autonomic system response, and subcortical neuronal abnormalities appears to be the culprit. MicroRNAs have been found among multiple tissues indicating a fibromyalgia pathogenesis. And these are the genes that I found in the research that were identified in fibromyalgia. I'm sure this isn't a complete list, but these are the ones that I found. So I'm going to try not to bore you too much. I mean, this has been heavy so far. You have to like biology, I suppose, in order to like this topic, but let's look at what I found in my DNA. So your DNA could look very different from mine. You might have other mutations or variations that I didn't have. All the ones that I found in mine related to fibromyalgia were common and considered normal based on population size. But I didn't have the following genes in my DNA. I thought it was interesting that in the GCH1 gene, I had several that were considered good protections for a higher pain tolerance. That's good news. I always felt like I had a high pain tolerance. I had 3 babies, all natural. But I also had one common variation in the MEFV gene that was good with a magnitude of 0 that states missense mutations in the MEFV gene are associated with fibromyalgia syndrome and correlate with elevated IL-1 beta plasma levels. I do have some variations with IL-1B, but they don't seem to be of much concern. I just thought it was interesting. And last but not least, the MTHFR gene. I have 2 SNP variations in the MTHFR, but that affects about 20% of people, not rare. It's a polymorphism. I am heterozygous for MTHFR variants C677T and A129BC, called a compound or double heterozygosity. These are known to contribute to folic acid problems. So until I talk to my doctor, I'm not concerned about folic acid. But I do understand that it probably had an impact on my fibromyalgia in my body. As we know, though, environmental factors come into play that increase our risk of having fibro. According to several authorities on the subject, getting tested for MTHFR mutations is not needed and no special treatment is required. Well, I think it's a personal choice of whether you have this done or not. Testing would not explain why a person has the MTHFR or why homocysteine levels might be elevated if you have those checked. But we do know that any pregnant woman should take folic acid, and those are in their prenatal vitamins that will prevent any pregnancy complications. So basically, we have a genetic predisposition, and it may not be a cause for concern. I mean, I know I have fibromyalgia, so for me, the genes that showed up make sense. What I just described is not a cause of a rare condition called. However, MTHFR gene polymorphism does show to affect the symptoms in fibromyalgia, like chronic pain and fatigue. In one study, polymorphisms of the HTR2A gene showed an association with fibromyalgia, and the carriers of the genotype GG and G allele has a risk of 24.9 times more likely to develop the disease. I have several genetic polymorphisms of this gene. It's quite common, but isn't fibromyalgia considered common too? There's like 2 to 4% of the population of adults who have fibromyalgia now. Well, I feel like it went down a huge rabbit hole, but I hope you got something out of my nonstop studying and research of this topic over the last 2.5 days. We're all on a journey, and our journeys might differ, but we're in this together. If you had your DNA tested and want to look at the genes that you have, I put a couple of links below for you to check out. I paid $12 with Prometheus to upload my DNA to it, but I also linked a free one that I also used. But here's a warning. It can be scary to look at all of these things and potential diseases that you might get. Like, there appears to be a strong genetic link to deafness, but I'm not deaf. I might be somewhat hard of hearing, according to my husband. So it's not a definitive chance that you'll get that disease. For example, I have a high risk of macular degeneration, and that happened. I also have a high risk for type 2 diabetes, and so I'm not eating sugar. So hopefully that will prevent that. I also believe that eating clean and healthy foods help too. I find this stuff to be fascinating, and I'll continue to learn and share with you. I hope that's okay with you. I send you gentle hugs and support. Love you. Okay. This isn't going to work if you're going to lick me the whole time. You got his. Usually don't be debilitating. So premature